What's going on, guys? Welcome to episode 37 of Dispersing the Cloud. As always, this is a little late, but we're doing it anyway. So I'm going to do two broadcasts today, one for 2 weeks ago and one for this week. So at least I'll be on time for this week's. So a little recap of that week. We're looking at the week of the 11th in September. So I just started doing web design. It's just becoming a necessity as I start to push some of these ideas and these projects that we have going. As I start to push them a lot faster, the response time that I have right now, waiting for someone to get back to me to fix websites or waiting to update websites, won't work for the speed that I'm trying to go. So I had to teach myself a new skill, and I'm in the process of teaching myself that new skill. So I spent a couple hours doing website design, learning. I'm going to start on a Squarespace platform and then move to the other spaces, so I kind of get a general view of all of it. But the cool thing about that is because I've been doing these projects and because I've been doing all these books, like my brain is absorbing information very, very rapidly. Within a couple hours, I would say probably 2 hours, I got a pretty good handle on the first platform for web design, and I'm probably, maybe I'll have it ready by next week, hopefully. Pagans this week at Megan, you know what, I don't know Megan's new last name, Megan Cleland, Casey Cleland's sister. I know she has a new name. She's had it for like 10 years. I just don't know what it is. But she's having us at her school again, and Elizabeth Shaw is going to be reading her book, Pagans, there. And then I have a meeting on Friday with a bride and groom for next year, so I'm already starting to book for that, so that's kind of exciting. And then on Sunday, we have Grape Festival in Lodi with the band Kingdom. So that's kind of up and coming. This week's book was The Gift of Dyslexia by Eldon, Braun, and Ronald Davis. I was really excited to read this book because, as most of you know, I am dyslexic. So when I got the opportunity to, when this book was presented to me, The Gift of Dyslexia, it was kind of intriguing. Like, oh yeah, I'm special. I'm not stupid. I'm special. So I gave it a read. Amazing book, super fascinating. It's interesting to read something about yourself, really, like when you've struggled with something your whole life and you feel isolated and alienated, thinking that you're the only person with it, and then you read this book about tons of other people who are experiencing the exact same thing. The first illustration of the child sitting in the classroom, literally like watching the clock tick, I totally related. I actually remember one time in my Spanish teacher's class, Miss Godagny, I literally counted every minute and made tallies for the complete time that I was in the class. I think I got to like 45 minutes before she came over and was like, Samuel, what are you doing? And I just had like 45 tally marks, and I was just watching the minutes and making tally marks. So I found that to be kind of amusing. So the author of this book, he's a dyslexic as well. He also was labeled as autistic and some other things, and we know that our school system really isn't designed for people with this type of gift. And I actually didn't consider it to be a gift truly until after reading this book. Malcolm Gladwell talks about it in David and Goliath, how it could be an attribute. Things that we think are a disability actually turn out to be something far better for us once we fully understand them. And now that I fully understand dyslexia and how it works and why it's working, it explains a lot about the way that I operate, and explains a lot about why I'm good at some things that I'm good at. So I'll just kind of go down. You guys know how I do it. I just do the quotes that I wrote down. It's always the student that teaches me. And we're back. I'm losing connection every now and then. So that was something from the author of the book, saying that from his years of experience in teaching, he's found that if we really just listen, students will tell us what we need to know about them. So the students tell us everything we need to know. The dyslexic learning style is actually a talent. So they talk about the talent of dyslexia to be something called disorientation. And disorientation happens with infants when their mobility at a very young age isn't highly developed. So picture a child lying in a crib, right? And they're not able to move their head yet. And so the child's laying in the crib, he's not able to move his head, and all they can see is this little, like a blinder's view of the world, and they see an elbow pop into their world, right? Maybe it's their mother's elbow, maybe it's their father's elbow. But they start developing this skill called disorientation to where they see a 3D image of the entire person just by looking at an elbow. Now, it's not deductive reasoning. We know that children develop deductive reasoning at the age of 3. So what they are doing is they are actually building a skill to see three-dimensional objects by only getting a piece of that object. They're able to see the entire thing. And so from a very young age, they start to develop this. The problem is when they get to the age of 3 and they need to start developing deductive reasoning, they don't develop deductive reasoning. They have the appearance of developing deductive reasoning, but what they're actually doing is they're using their skill of dyslexia to discern immediately what things are. They give an example of a child at the age of 3 seeing a ball of fur, and it takes them a couple seconds to realize that that ball of fur is black. We have a cat that's black. Cats can roll into balls. I don't see the cat anywhere else. That's probably my cat. Let's go play with it. A dyslexic person would see the same ball of fur and go, cat. It just has the ability to see what it is immediately and what it would possibly look like. This is kind of fascinating to me too, because they relate this to athletes. People who have great spatial awareness end up making great athletes. And so this is something I definitely related to. My coaches in high school used to say that somehow it seemed that I always, no matter how crazy the scramble was, it seemed that I always knew where I was on the mat. And it's not something I consciously tried to do. It was just something that I just knew. I knew how far away the line was. Right now, without looking up, I know how high the ceiling is. I know the space underneath me, how far to the ground, and it's just this weird. There's no really easy way to explain it. This is how he actually explained it in the book, and this actually helps. So if you close your eyes and you hold your hand out and you picture a piece of cake, they use cake because most people like cake. And if you want to do it, I'll run you through the exercise. So you hold your hand out and you pretend that you have a piece of cake. So with your eyes closed, pretend you have a piece of cake, and you ask yourself, what flavor is the cake? And then you ask yourself, all right, how is the cake cut? And then you ask yourself, what direction is the point? If it's pointing a wedge, what direction is the point facing? All right, now look at the sides of the cake. And your eyes are closed. Now look at the back of the cake. Now look at the top of the cake. Now look at the bottom of the cake. Now open your eyes. Most people who read well, who don't have any type of brain disorientation, they would see that piece of cake, and in their imagination, when I said look at the side of the cake, they would turn it. And when I said look at the top, they would turn it like this. But a dyslexic person, when they have their eyes closed and they say look at the side of the cake, their mind's eye literally goes out to here and sees their body from the side, their cake from the side. If I was to say look at the top, that dyslexic person would move their mind's eye and they would see a bird's eye view. Same thing with the bottom. So it's a disorientation skill that they've developed, and there's really no other way to explain it but that. And so it says, I wrote down, being able to see the world with creative eyes is another symptom of dyslexia. This is why so many artists, athletes, and inventors have symptoms of dyslexic. Genius doesn't occur in spite of dyslexia. A lot of times it occurs because of it. These are just some people who had symptoms of dyslexia. Albert Einstein, General Patton, Walt Disney, Thomas Edison, Alexander Graham Bell, Leonardo da Vinci, Winston Churchill, Woodrow Wilson, Cher, I guess. So those are just some people who had signs of dyslexia. And again, you got to think of it as dyslexia is actually disorientation capability. So the capability of taking your mind's eye of what you see of your digital self, it's like the Matrix, right? And being able to whip that around in a 360-degree angle. So these are some attributes that kind of go with dyslexia. They can utilize brain ability to alter and create perspectives as their primary ability. 2, highly aware of their environment. 3, they are more curious and adventurous. 4, they think mainly in pictures instead of words. This was really interesting because I figured this out on my own without having anybody tell me about dyslexia. I figured out that I see words in pictures. They're not little letters divided for phonetics. It's literally just one picture. The problem with that is, and I'll talk about it a little later, it's a 3D picture seen like 60 or 70 different ways. 5, they are highly intuitive and insightful. 6, they think and perceive multidimensionally using all of their senses. They can 7, they can experience thoughts as reality. 8, they have vivid imagination. 7 is good and bad because and now I know I have this habit of playing out scenarios in my head. This was also from a book called Bigger, Faster, Stronger. Charles Duhigg. That might be right because that just popped in my head. The cloud's pretty much gone at this point, and so I just trust whatever goes in. I think it's Charles Duhigg. So we're just going to go with it. But he talks about as you map out mental mapping, right? Playing out scenarios in your head. Well, it's something that you're born with, and he would argue that it's something that can be developed. This author actually argues that it's dyslexia. They can experience those thoughts. They become reality. The problem with that is, I forget who said this. Freud said this, I think. Sigmund Freud said this. When you play out a reality in your head, right, and you accept that reality, the actual reality is never as good as your fantasy. So he says it's best not to fantasize or do those playouts in your head. Because then you just end up getting disappointed because your actual reality will never be as perfect as your perceived reality or your imaginative reality. Characteristics of dyslexic people: higher than normal intelligence, extraordinary creativity abilities, and the main gift of mastery. And so the main gift of mastery is actually what the whole book's about taking, as you read, taking your mind's eye and stabilizing it. So the whole book is about this process of teaching dyslexic people to stop their mind's eye from doing the 360 view only when they read. And so what they've done to do this is they tell students to close their eyes and to picture 2 rods that are going through here down to the ears, and then another rod going in behind the head where the eye sits. And they tell it to place it there. And then they ask them to read. And the person who's helping them will notice, and it's a very visible notice. I was hanging out with my buddy Ian Bender, and I did this on him, and he has a little bit of this skill of doing his mind's eye. And I could tell when it went. It was really weird. I said, did it just go? And he said, yeah, it's interesting that you saw it, but it did. It went there, but it didn't go. We were doing the cake exercise, and he could see the sides, but when he went to go see the bottom, I could tell that he didn't move his mind's eye, and he's literally just sitting there, and you could tell by his facial expressions. It was really creepy and weird. Anyway, so they teach them to do that, and after 36 hours of training, so they go in, they do a couple hours, come back, go in, 36 hours of training, these students are increasing their reading level by 7 to 8 grades, and it's phenomenal. I was a little ticked off when I found out about it because I'm like, I'm over here, like, it took me till 23 to figure out how to really read, and I'm going to start using these techniques to make me even better at reading. And I tried a little bit of it, and it definitely does help. And you can definitely tell when you read a word and your mind's eye leaves that spot, and you have to refocus and put it back and really focus in. Generally, I don't want to jump the gun here. So in the 1920s, Samuel Orton He came up with cross-lateralization of the brain, which is basically dyslexia, but it's a process of thought. So I understood dyslexia as, oh, I'm using my left brain when I should be using my right brain. But really, it's a process. I'm doing it on purpose. I'm just doing it subconsciously. I'm doing it subconsciously because it's worked so well for me in the past that that's just the way that my brain does it. So it is a thought process, and a lot of times it's not a lack of concentration when you're reading. It's actually a overload of concentration, because every single word that you see, you're trying to see it in a 360 view. So verbal communications stop at 250 words per minute. So I do this a lot with my audiobooks. I speed them up so I can hear faster. And for someone who's dyslexic, hearing words, I get a very visual picture image, 3D image of everything that's going on in the spoken words. I don't have to read them to see that. I literally hear them, and I'm able to use my distortion of reality to give me very vivid and very clear pictures of what's going on. So audible learning works very well for me, and I can do that up to 250 words a minute, and then it starts to fade off. So we talked about infants using disorientation to experience life and objects around them. By the time they hit school, it's too late. Concentration becomes a problem, not because there's a lack of it, because there's more concentration. This was really interesting. So he talks a little bit about how dyslexic people end up functioning, right, in reality, in society, when they can't read. How did I get a job? How did I make it to college? How did I get through some of my classes? I had a lot of help from friends and family to get past high school, right? Because I was a good athlete, I got a lot of extra help that most people wouldn't get. But this was really interesting. He said one of the main tricks that dyslexic people do, and you might have a boss who's dyslexic, next time your boss or someone above you asks you to read something and tell them what you think of it, they might not want your opinion. They might just want to know what it says. I did that quite often when I was a manager. I did it quite often in school. I would have conversations with kids and my classmates about books that I could really care less about, but I needed to know what was in the book so I could have a conversation with the teacher and let her know that I read the book as well. I'm just a bad test taker. So I thought that was pretty fascinating that that's in there. Distortion gives you a multiple view of the same word. This is where it gets really interesting. So when you're looking at a word, distortion, you see the word the. I see the word the from the front, from the bottom, from the top, from the back, from the angle, from this angle. It's a 360 view of the word the, which is the over-concentration that we're talking about. Because everything that I've experienced in my life, let's say I'm 6 years old, has been a 3D object, but now you're asking me to think in flat, plain terms, which my brain doesn't work like that. You're getting multiple views of the same word. This is why spelling becomes a problem for dyslexic people, because we don't see the words as three different letters. We see it as one big picture. So when we're spelling, we're just trying to draw the picture as close to what we saw from our memory. And if it's a little off, it doesn't really matter to us. It says the same thing because our distortion makes it say the same thing. This was what really got interesting for me. For dyslexic people, there are 40 different variations for 3-letter words. And the problem with that is there's only 6 of those variations that actually make sense. So for every 3-letter word that a dyslexic person sees, they have 39 pieces of bad data that they have to get rid of. So this is where reading and spelling really becomes a problem for a dyslexic person, because not only are they trying to decipher what is written and sound it out, but they also have 39 pieces of 3D data instantly that are useless information getting in the way of them using phonetics. So a dyslexic person can process 400 to 2,000 times faster information coming in than a normal person's brain. And this is verbally. So some dyslexic students move, and this kind of plays in, you've heard me talk about this before, me and my dad. If I cruise into his place and there's a movie on, TV's facing away from me, I can walk in, and within 2 seconds of being in the door, I can tell him what movie he's watching. And 9 times out of 10, I get it right. It's very rarely that I don't. And I think that has to do with that verbal and audio processing that I have of 400 to 2,000 times faster than a normal person. I don't have to discern what movie it is. I don't have to use deductive reasoning. I literally use my distortion field, and immediately I see a full view of the movie from one line, which is creepy and weird, and I don't know why I do it, but it is what it is. Some dyslexic students move to compensate for feeling motion sickness. So a lot of times, and you guys probably see me, I'm moving all the time, but a lot of times when we're focusing, our disorientation that we're doing constantly feels like motion sickness. So as we motion, a lot of people call it ADD, but we're bouncing around. It's not ADD, attention deficit. It's actually an overload of information. I'm concentrating so much on everything around me, and I'm seeing it from all these different directions. It'll make me sick if I sit still. I'll get woozy. So my body naturally just counteracts that. A lot of people do kicking of the feet. I do kicking of the feet a lot. I kick and I rock. One time, as I was a sales manager for Dignity Memorial, this was great. I didn't even notice I was doing it. I was just in my own zone. We were all sitting, big conference, and we're sitting in these folding chairs, and I end up like, I'm telling you, like, I'm bouncing around. I end up like this, and I'm on the chair like this, and I'm sitting. And I mean, I'm in a suit and tie, and I'm sitting like this around, other people that are like high execs in the company, and I didn't even realize I was doing it, and I was like, oh my God. Casually get down. How are you going to casually get down? You got to casually get down. It just never happened. But we do it because sitting still, it's too much for... It's not too much. I can sit still. It's just very uncomfortable for me to sit still. It makes a lot more sense for me to move. 3 to 6 months, babies start to develop the skill of dyslexia. We talked about that. Age of 3, they start deductive reasoning around the age of 3. For dyslexic people, they do not need analytical skills. Again, it's really, really weird. I think I can relate to that somewhat. Now, I've developed analytical skills, I think, only because dyslexia can only take you so far to a certain point, and then you have to get past it. My age was like 23, and then it was like, okay, it feels like I'm stuck where I'm at. I got to start figuring out these whole, words things, because I can't communicate via email. I can't communicate via text. We didn't have voice text yet. We didn't have Dragon Diction or things that could read back to you like our Macs do now, right? So without that, I was basically disabled. I was going to be doing manual labor the rest of my life, and that forced me, and thank God I had a great brother who loves me, but he also forced me to pull my head up and figure out how my brain works and get to learning it, because I really didn't need analytical skills. I would use my dyslexia distortion to basically figure out everything. Couldn't read road signs, but if you give me general directions, I could figure out where you were. We're talking about driving around in Fresno. I hated it when my friends would move, because then they'd tell me the street address. We didn't have smartphones. I was like, bro, I have no clue how to get there. And they would tell me all the names of the streets, and I was just like, oh, it's never going to happen. Just tell me what directions to go and what landmarks to see, and I'll find you. I think that says, daydreaming. Okay, so daydreaming is actually, they say daydreaming is a process of genius. A lot of people would say it is a waste of time, but again, you are exercising your distortion field when you're daydreaming. One of the gifts of dyslexia, is to sort things out automatically. Again, no analytical skills, you just somehow know what's going on. It's not deductive reasoning, and it takes as an advantage. I think this is part of the reason that I do really well reading people. I don't know if it's I'm reading nonverbals, if I'm reading emotions in the eyes or whatever, but I can pretty much generally tell how someone's feeling, how things are going with them just from one quick look at them. This has been a blessing and a curse in relationships for me, just because you just sense very early when things are going great or things are not going great, and then you bring up and you have awkward conversations like, no, you look and sound really happy right now. I can tell something's up, what's going on. It's just really interesting, as I was reading this book, just seeing a lot of this has manifested itself in my own life. One of the gifts of dyslexia, we just read that. Dyslexia, coaching. So this is the coaching. Usually takes 36 hours, and then the students get about 7 or 8 grade levels in improvement. So this book as a whole is definitely a 5 for me. I think the misunderstanding of what dyslexia is in our school system is unbelievably horrible. Every teacher should read this and put it to work. If you guys know anybody who struggles with dyslexia, get this book and you could fix them 36 hours like that. The process is really easy. It shows you the tools how to do it. They even do some stuff where you're like making models out of clay to help dyslexic people fasten those pictures in their head. And there's an actual like location and institution you can go to, and they'll help you out and do all this for you. I don't have that information because I didn't write it down. Next week I am doing, I think I said, 5-star on that one. Next week I'm doing A Movable Feast by Ernest Hemingway. I don't think this is a fiction from him. I think this is a narrative story of part of his life from him, because it has been recommended by a couple of these other books that I've been reading, and I don't read fiction. So they keep referring to this book. I think it might have been recommended to me by Timothy Ferriss and the 4-Hour Work Week. I think they mentioned it during that. So just has to do with travel, has to do with being able to take your career pretty much anywhere and being able to work, and that's kind of how Ernest Hemingway did his deal. So I'm going to review that one next week. It's a very short book, and I don't know what type of quotes I'm going to get out of it, so it might be a shorter episode. Next week I have a photo shoot with JSM Photos in San Francisco. I'm working more on the webpage. I get Sling Studio for me and Casey Olson's podcast that's going to be happening coming up in Fresno, and I'm going to play with that and figure out how that works. And then, that's what I got going on next week. So this week, the whole process for me that I didn't really cover, as I get more and more in depth, money becomes less of a problem because I'm starting to pull in good and substantial income, but difficulty level becomes much, much higher. There's way more going on. Scheduling becomes harder. Just life becomes harder. I talked about in my last episode, like, man, you're doing this by yourself, which is very, very difficult. And the longer you do it by yourself and the older. And we're back. The less and less support you get from other people who are your same age doing the same thing, because there's not very many people your same age doing the same thing. So this is my quote for the week. When difficult things happen to you, there is only action. This is a paraphrase from Marcus Aurelius and Nathan Dennis from his video he posted a couple weeks ago on taking action in your life, and action being the only answer, the only direction. This is also from one of my mentors, Tom LeMasters. He used to tell me, when you're looking for an answer from God, you're looking for a direction, remember that God can only steer a car that's moving.